Okay, we'll move on with the class here. And as you know, we're talking about the how the molecular relationship works and how it's governed. Last week, we were talking about what doesn't work very well, and that's the way leadership works in the world out there. In the world out there, the leadership works by uh, you have the leader, and the leader picks uh, everyone for the various positions. If you're working for a company, the your boss will decide everything that happens within your group. And if somebody applies for a job, well, he's the one that picks the new guy and puts the new guy in his position. And that's called top-down leadership. Now, uh, the molecular relationship is different. The molecular relationship operates by the principle of election. So in a regular group um, among general humanity, if you have a group and if you have a leader, um, the uh, and a new leader is picked, the new leader is picked by somebody in a hierarchy up there. And that guy in the hierarchy up there often doesn't know, like, let's say there's 12 people in the group, and you have a group leader or a foreman or a boss that's over the group in a big company. And say he gets promoted, and somebody has to take his place. Well, who's going to decide that? The person that decides that's going to be a bigger boss up there in the hierarchy. And the trouble is, if he has to pick somebody among the 12 in the group, he's handicapped in the fact that he doesn't know much what's going on in the group. He doesn't know the interactions. He doesn't know who the people trust. He just knows who's maybe somebody he likes, maybe somebody he plays golf with. So he picks some guy. And quite often, it's not the person that the group would have picked if they could have picked. It's not the person that they would have wanted to be the leader. Sometimes they're lucky and it is, but oftentimes it's it's not. And so in the molecular group, things are done differently. It's done by the power of election. So in the molecular group, it's from the bottom up, or as we talked about last week, the power of initiation. If something new is created, it has to be done by somebody that takes the initiative. And that person takes the initiative, he starts something up, and it's still done by power of election, because if somebody says, look, I'm starting this thing up, will you join me? And when they join, they're really voting for the guy, okay? So in that way, even when something is started by an initiate, there's a voting power, because it's just like Jesus started his group and the apostles voted him to be the leader by joining. Uh, but then after Jesus left, then a new leader had to be selected by new means. I mean, it couldn't be done by initiation because the group was already initiated. But there's portions of the expansion. When a group expands, there's power to initiate that opportunities that present themselves. So the difference between the groups we have in this world and the molecular group will be, they will be selected when the group is established by some initiate. Then the initiate also has to be supported even afterwards, because if he completely screws everything up, they could actually vote him out or or reject him and start something else by another initiate in another direction. Now that could be right or wrong. And as we pointed out, this happened with Apple with Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs started Apple, and several people complained about him, and the board complained about him, and they fired him, and they almost went bankrupt after he left. And he went and started another successful business, but then they called him back in as they were just about to go under, and he was able to revive the company. So they made a big mistake in getting rid of their initiate. When somebody initiates something, they have a vision as to how it works. And so they're generally the best person to be the leader if they actually uh, laid the foundation to the whole thing. There are rare exceptions, perhaps. There's an exception to everything, but uh, generally that's the case. Now, as the molecules expand, there's a lot of leadership opportunities. Each triangle of people will have a leading unit. Now remember, each unit is composed of a male-female partnership. And so in a triangle, you'd have 6 people, three males and 3 females. And in the whole molecule of 12, you'll have 12 males and 12 females. Now, when a new molecule is created, or even a new triad, someone can go out and they can initiate that. They can say, hey, I would like to start a new molecule. Say we've already got a group of 24. So under the leadership of the world, the way it would work is the leader of the 24 would say, I'm going to pick John Smith here. He's going to be the new leader, and he's going to be over the new molecule. Okay, that's the old style of leadership. The new style is different, is that either there will be an initiate that will gather people together and create a new molecule, or if the people just gather together naturally, then to select their leaders, what they'll do is call for a volunteer to lead. Okay, let's say we have 3 people that say, I will volunteer. Okay, so you have 3 people, so we don't know which one's best. So the new molecule would have a vote, and the person that gets the most votes would be the new leader. But then let's say things go along and people aren't very happy with his leadership. What happens then is anyone in the group that thinks they can do a better job can challenge him for leadership. Okay, so let's say that Fred over here thinks he can do a better job. So he says, I would like to present the reasons why I think I should be the leader of the group. And so he presents his reasons and he calls for a vote. So if the majority then vote for Fred, he then replaces the other leader, and the other leader just takes a regular position in the molecule, and Fred becomes the new leader. If Fred doesn't get the majority of the votes, then the old leader stands. And so this way, the cream begins to rise to the top because the people in the group understand people in the group much more than some outsider that's just sees them from afar. If you've ever worked in a group and worked side by side with a bunch of people, you get to know what they're like and what they can do and what they may be good at. And so a lot better than maybe your boss would in the normal field of endeavors. So now, on the other hand, a higher up in the molecule can recommend something. He may say, "Now I recommend Jim over here. I think he would be good," but he doesn't have power to just command the group to put Jim in power. Jim would have to make his case to the group and then call for an election and for approval. Now, if you only have one person that wants to lead, it's pretty easy. Uh, if you have numerous people that want to lead, then you have an election and the person elected would be the one to lead. But in the regular world, when somebody's put in a position and they're not good at it, or they're not doing it well, or they're not doing it the way people want, they often stay there for years or a long period of time and no correction is made. What makes the molecular leadership different is the power of correction. As soon as when the group sees that things aren't working right, they somebody can step forward and say, "Hey, I think I can make these corrections and make things run more smoothly." He can call for a vote and change can take place right away. This is the way the body works. When there's a wound in the body heals itself. You don't have to go out and if you scratch your finger, you don't go get a new finger. Your finger will heal itself over a period of time. And so this the molecular order needs to work in the same way. It's self-correcting. And we find in the leadership of the world, the self-correcting mechanism just is not there. If you want to witness this, just look at Congress. They create a czar or organization or something, and it never goes away. If it doesn't work, it still stays. It doesn't matter if it works or not. Once it's there and once something has funding that's created by government, they can't get rid of it. I mean, it just stays there for eternity until the government actually collapses. But they never, very rarely do they ever streamline anything. And once money is spent on something, the budget remains for that thing. It just doesn't go away. So spending just keeps increasing and increasing, and waste keeps increasing and increasing because there's very little self-correction in government or big business, which is very similar to each other. Now, in a small business, there's a lot more self-correction because you have uh, an initiate in most small businesses that sees what's going on and he makes sure that things get corrected. Okay, any comments on that before we move on?
Yes, JJ. Uh, when you talk about elections, then all sort of personality problems will rise because the election will not be anonymous. It will be the votes will everybody will know what everybody voted.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it might create problem.
it's impossible to do away with personality problems. There will be probably fewer this way than there would be the other way, because if the boss comes in and if authority comes in and says Jim's going to be your new leader and nobody likes him, then there's going to be a lot more problem than if the majority vote for somebody they do like and do feel comfortable with. But there's always a temptation of personality problems. This is why the teaching is so strong to overlook the personality and look on the soul. Okay. And when people understand, now there's a lot of people, for instance, with me, And a lot of things going on in my life, I just assume somebody else take charge and handle certain things that I, I really don't want to do myself. If somebody wants to say, hey, I'd want to handle this, I think, well, that's just fine with me. And so there's a lot of people who just will enjoy being in a molecule and not necessarily being a leader, but just participating and uh, contributing what he or she can. And a lot of people will be comfortable in doing this. And there will be some competition for leadership. Now, eh, let's say a molecule is created and there's two uh, very people very motivated toward leadership, and they have an election, and say one of them is Jim and another one of them is Fred. So they elect Jim, and Fred thinks, boy, I think my leadership skills are going to waste. Well, what he can do is he can go initiate another molecule so he can lead that. Or maybe there's one that's mostly filled, and he can go over and say, hey, I would like to lend my leadership skills to this group. So there will be opportunities as molecules expand for leadership. But sometimes you'll have the case of two quality people being together at the same time and a little bit of competition there. But the key to making the molecule work will be to overlook the personality and look upon the soul and look upon the highest good. And now, then we go to the principle of leadership. And it's interesting the principle of leadership and how much power leaders should be given came to the forefront during World War II when Hitler started the war. And Hitler just was made tremendous inroads that just amazed the world. I mean, he only had 60 million people there in Germany, and he basically was fought against a good portion of the world. And everyone was amazed to see how he was able to get things done very quickly. And this created a debate in the United States. People said, well, boy, if President Roosevelt wants to get something done, he has to go through Congress, and a bunch of stuff he wanted to get done, he's never been able to get done. And look, old Hitler over here, he just he decides he wants something accomplished, he just orders it, and boom, you know. Uh, Good example of the difficulty is like Trump was elected on the idea of building a wall, and for 4 years he tried to get that wall built, and he was unable to. He just got a small portion of it built, but he had resistance like crazy. But if Hitler, if he wanted to build a wall, he'd just say, "Hey, we're building the wall. Anybody have a problem with it? Well, you'll regret it." So Hitler could order a wall built and get built in just a couple months. And so people saw this, and they started comparing democracy to a dictatorship after when they saw how much power Hitler had to get things done. And so there began to be a debate in the United States. Well, maybe a dictatorship is better than a democracy, because boy, look at how much progress he can make in a really short period of time. Well, this debate went on, and a good example that was if Roosevelt, when the war started, before the United States entered, nobody in the United States, very few wanted to go to war. I mean, maybe like 80% of them didn't want to go to war. Were against they didn't even want to help England out very much. We were a very isolated country. And Roosevelt saw the need to put Hitler down, thank God. And he had to use subterfuge to help Roosevelt. He had to do some under the table stuff to send aid to Winston Churchill and help him out. And and then, uh, but even as Hitler grew in power, the people in the country did not want to go to war. So if Franklin Roosevelt would have had the power of Hitler, he could have just said, well, Churchill's getting the help no matter what. We're going to take care of that Hitler. But he had to, we had he had to go through Congress, and we had to go through elected representatives, and so uh, people began to look at this and think, uh, well, maybe a dictatorship is a way to go. Some people started thinking that direction. But then the Japanese did us probably a favor in bombing Pearl Harbor, because after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the country woke up, and instead of only about a quarter of the people supporting the idea of taking Hitler out, all of a sudden, almost everybody supported the idea of taking Hitler out. And this changed the course. This united the people enough so that we were able to make a lot of progress after that. And then it turned out that when a democracy is united, it can defeat dictatorship. So, but there's advantages to both sides. The advantages of having a lot of power, the guy at the top having power to decide, cuts through a lot of red tape and makes things happen faster. But unlimited power produces uh, disastrous results. So power has to be checked in some way. Yet in a democracy, power is very limited, so it's often very hard to get things done. You hear all these politicians complaining they got lots of good ideas, but they can't get anything done because not everybody's going along with their ideas. And so it's and then oftentimes what we do get passed is kind of watered down compromise from both sides to the extent that there's waste. And so there's advantages to democracy, there's advantages to giving somebody power of decision, and the molecular order has the best of both worlds. Okay, the the leader is selected by the power of democracy, by the power of election. But then when he's in, he has power to make decisions. So he can just cut through all the red tape and make a decision. But he's checked in power. Unlike a dictator can do whatever he wants, and if people are unhappy with it, well, he just puts them in jail or something. But in the molecular order, if the guy gets uh, overruns the will of the people in his group, then he can be challenged at any time. So let's say Jim gets in power and he starts throwing around his authority too much without taking in consideration what the group wants. If he starts doing that, then what's going to happen is Fred will say, well, he speaks to the group and he says, well, Fred's or Jim's getting a little bit out of control here and people aren't too happy with him, so I'm going to challenge him. And so he can challenge him and then replace him. But if Jim has any common sense, he'll pick up, well, I've thrown my weight around too much, people are getting disgruntled, so I better start listening a little bit more. So he calls for the next major decision. He calls the group together and says, this is a decision that we face. What do you guys think? And so he gets input from the group. So this will force the group leader to call the group together for important decisions and get their input. And then most times he'll actually go along with the group will. But if he, for instance, gets an inspiration that he feels is from his higher self, he may have something that may go against the average people in the group that he wants to implement. In this case, he would have power to do that, but he has to take in consideration whether or not the group will accept it. So sometimes he may not even go for the highest good because the group's consciousness just isn't there yet. The old saying goes, we have to plow with the horses that we have. And so uh, the wise group leader will plow the horses he has, and he will take in consideration what needs done. Now, the fact that the group leader has power to make a decision is can help a lot. Let's say that there's a decision that needs to be made, and he just can't call the group together and say, "Hey, I want your feedback on this." The decision has to be made, so he can just make it. He doesn't have to wait 2 weeks or another week for a meeting or something like that. And this is what we talked about last week with businesses. Curtis and I did a lot of selling signs to businesses. And you approach a big company about buying a sign, they'll say, well, give us a bunch of materials on it and write up a proposal, and we'll present it at the next meeting and come back in another month, and we'll see if we can get an answer. And that's the type of response you get from a big business. There's nobody you can approach in these big businesses that just can give you a yes or no answer. But you go to a small business, you just talk to the owner and he can say yes or no right away. And that really, it's easier to sell 12 signs to 12 small businesses than to sell 12 signs to one big business. And so Curtis and I, we focused on small businesses when we were out selling. Plus, you get a lot better sense of accomplishment because you make a sale quite more often selling to small businesses where you get a yes or no answer. So in the molecular order, no matter how big it gets, you can talk to a person that can give you a yes or no right away, unless he feels that the group would be upset if they were not consulted. So so that's interesting. My uh, last wife worked for Micron, which is a big company, and they were having financial difficulties at the time. And she said that she felt that if this were implemented in her company, that it would just reverse things and put them on a positive track right away, because she was always complaining how sluggish it was and how hard it was to get anything through, because everything was decided by hierarchy and meetings, and um, oftentimes people were afraid to make a decision of any kind, and so she was always complaining how sluggish it was to get positive things accomplished. So in the molecular leader is not a dictator, but offers direction, has power to make decisions for the group, but he will take counsel from the group members themselves when necessary or when convenient. If it's not convenient, he has power to make decisions for the group or reverse them later on if it turns out to be a poor decision. So let's suppose that you come up with some good idea for the group and you're not a leader or anything, but you have a good idea. Well, you in your group meeting, you can just present it, and the group can vote on it. And um, if everybody thinks that idea is good, including the group leader, well, then it can be implemented. And if everybody thinks it's a good idea, and uh, the leader, for instance, doesn't, maybe the leader feels threatened because he thinks, boy, this guy could replace me. Uh, he still, if everybody thinks it's a good idea but him, he's kind of forced to go along with it because he could always be replaced if he does not uh, follow leadership principles that is best for the group. Jesus gave an interesting quote about that applies to the molecular group. He says this: "The kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and they that exercise authority upon them are called benefactors." Does that sound familiar? our, our political people see themselves as our benefactors today. He says, "But ye shall not be so, but he that is greatest among you shall be as the younger, and he that is the chief as he that does serve. For whether is greater, he that sitteth at meat, or he that serveth? Is not he that sitteth at meat? But I'm among you as he that serveth." And then he said, "He that is greatest among you shall be your servant." So the leader in a molecular group takes the attitude of being the servant rather than the benefactor, rather than the one to be served, rather than the one to be adored. He will seek to serve, which Jesus points out here. This is the opposite of the way leadership works in the world. The way leadership works in the world, he says, they exercise lordship over them. And wherever we go in the world as it is now, the leaders exercise lordship over those whom they lead. And he says, this is not the way it is in the kingdom of heaven. It's just the opposite. He says, I am among you, not as one that is exercising lordship over you, but I'm among you as a servant. And then during the Last Supper, he gave an example of that by kneeling down before the apostles and washing their feet. And when he came to Peter, Peter says, "You're not going to wash my feet." He says, "I should wash your feet." And Jesus said to him, he says, "If I don't wash your feet, you have no part with me." He says, "Because I am showing the example of the servant, not the one that exercises lordship." And then Peter says, "Okay, wash my feet. You can wash my arms too. Wash my whole body if you want." So he changed his mind immediately when Jesus explained that to him. So we have two problems with leadership in the world. Either we have leadership where the leader just throws his weight around, and anyone that doesn't go along with him gets punished some way. Or we have leaders that are kind of leaders in name only, where they have so much resistance, especially in a democracy, where they just can't seem to get anything done. And so we don't want to tie the leader's hands, but on the other hand, we don't want to give him so much power that he turns into a dictator. This balance has to be set. Now, examples of servant leaders are like George Washington and Abraham Lincoln are two really good examples. These two men saw themselves as servants for their country, and they had the idea of doing whatever was necessary to benefit the whole, rather than themselves. And examples of leaders that saw themselves as benefactors that exercised tremendous authority, of course, would be leaders like Hitler and Napoleon, that if you didn't go along with them, you would either get imprisoned, killed, or punished in some way. The first seeks to serve the people, the second seek the people to serve him. And so the balance is what we're looking for. And the government and the molecular order will achieve that balance. Now, there's never a perfect balance. There's always problems in everything you do. And uh, so just presenting the right method doesn't always solve the problem. Like the Constitution of the United States is uh, a great improvement over government by a king or a tribe or something like that, where you have a democratic republic. But, and it's worked for most of our history, it's worked pretty good for us, made the country the wealthiest country on earth because it eliminated a lot of problems that are now kind of we kind of drifted away from it quite a bit. But what was interesting is the Constitution inspired a lot of other countries throughout the world. And there's a lot of countries that pattern their Constitution after ours, the guaranteed freedoms and all these things. But what's interesting is that some of the countries that have a very good constitution are ruled by a dictator that completely ignores them. And what this tells us, it's not what's down on paper that determines the quality of the government, but it's what's in the hearts of the people. Because if the people's consciousness isn't there yet, isn't to the point to where they can respect freedom and understand what it is, if it's not there, then it doesn't matter what's written up. It's a little bit like teachings of Jesus. Some people take the teachings of Jesus and go out and have their members drink Kool-Aid, poison Kool-Aid, like Jim Jones did, or do crazy things. And other people take the teachings of Jesus and like Mother Teresa and give us an example of service and love. So um, the same thing with any leadership principles. To be to be incorporated correctly, you need to gather together the right people that have the right understanding and the right consciousness and the right soul contact. That's why we're very particular about who we gather in creating a molecule, because if we just went and gathered just say 24 people off the street or even 24 regular new agers somewhere or seekers, probably wouldn't work. It needs to be started with 24 people that are close enough that they can have soul contact, overlook the personality, see the Christ in the other people in the group. And then the government of the molecule can be implemented correctly so it will actually work. And then when the first one is demonstrated, then the second one will be much easier, and the third one easier still. And eventually, the world will see that this type of governing system is what is needed, and they will begin to incorporate these principles in everything from business uh, groups, political groups, governments. Everything will eventually become uh, molecular. Okay, any comments on that before we move on here?
great teachings.
Oh, I had a question.
Sure.
What country or countries are you thinking of that has a really good constitution but is run by a dictator?
Well, like a number of the third world countries and the Central and South America, Chile under the dictator they had a while back had a really good constitution, but had a military leader. And I think Argentina under Galtieri, who was a military dictator, they had a decent constitution patterned somewhat after ours. There's quite a number, quite a few of the countries in Central and South America pattern their constitutions after ours in a lot of ways, but they're just not living up to it, and they don't their consciousness just isn't there yet for the people to really implement it the way it should be, and especially the people let their political leaders just get away with too much. You know, the political leaders get in and they think, well, look at Trump, how much difficulty he had in getting anything done because he had so much opposition. If he probably thought several times, boy, I wish I had more power. And but some of these guys in the third world countries, you know, they think that and they take the power. They become friends with the military and they get to the military behind them and they throw the Constitution under the table and just govern any way they feel like govern with the once they get the military behind them. So it's the consciousness of the people. And even if you have a king, if you have the consciousness of the people and a king that is, or a dictator, or a king that has the benefit of the people in his mind, you can even have a good government there if the consciousness of the people is there. So the advantage of when the founding fathers came together and produced the Constitution, you had a gathering together in this country of some of the greatest lights on the earth, because people came to America at that time because they wanted a better life for themselves. And they were people seeking for self-improvement. So it became a gathering place that gathered out to the more innovative people from the world at that time. So they were ready for a government that supported a higher consciousness. And I think we've devolved from that time. Right now, like free speech is under assault. Even Jerry Seinfeld, fairly liberal guy, was complaining about, boy, I can't hardly tell a joke anymore without being criticized. And because people are so sensitive about what you say, he's really worried that humor is dying in this country because you know, the First Amendment isn't what it used to be. So the not only this country but the world needs a shot in the arm for consciousness to raise us up more to understand the principle of freedom, because the principle of freedom is just extremely important, and it's something that people take for granted, because what always happens is you have groups that feel that if they could tell others what to do, then they could get more freedom for themselves. But getting just freedom for yourself or your little group is not what it's about. It's the maximum freedom and expression for the whole, which is the important thing. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Well, we'll continue this subject next week, and we'll talk a little bit more about the governing principles and how they work. And anyone's got any additional questions before we wrap it up?
JJ, I very much look forward to reading your new work here, and I look very much forward to seeing you all next week. I can only agree with everything you've said in a mighty way. I can feel the will, the mother will moving, the mother will polarity moving furiously in whatever form it needs to take through anyone that she can move through, which apparently a lot of us are the mother will. We are the will polarity, the survival chakra and everything that entails. And to rejoin with the spirit polarity, the will and spirit polarity are reconjoining, and it seems like the will is just the very last straw that has been pulled out, and it is moving, blazing across the world. And I can just feel how profound it is. I'm just ready. I'm ready to bust moves at any given moment with this beautiful group like this. This is perfect.
Well, we're glad to have you as a new member. So it's great to have you. And
Thomas,
absolutely.
what do you mean exactly when you say the mother will polarity?
Sure. In short, because there's plenty that could be said about it, but in short, is that the creator is one creator with four parts, that being the will, the spirit, the heart, and the body. And the will has been greatly diminished. The will, which is the director of the consciousness, the director and the reflector, the one who gives assurance, basically, that polarity, that part of that aspect of the creator. And it's like so we're all feeling the ripple effects of what happened in the first creation. The spirit went back on itself, went against its own will polarity, not realizing that the freer the will is, the more light that the spirit is able to manifest in creation. So there's been a radical diminishment of light, and the willpower, which is absolute love. It moves with our absolute essence, which is love itself, which we're always expanding. But to stay in the light, to have enough light for creation, we need the will. And
I think what you're really saying is we need that balance of that male-female energy. And
absolutely.
Yeah. So
exactly.
We'll probably have to leave it at that. That's a pretty deep subject you're talking about there, and that's covered somewhat in the book in a little bit different language. So
yes,
yeah,
exactly.
And that's kind of interesting that almost every teacher teaches in a different language, using sometimes two teachers will say the same thing using different words, and people will think the same different things, but maybe they're just really saying the same thing but using different words.
Yeah,
that's why in
it is complex.
My teachings, I always try to use common words with common definitions. And I notice a lot of philosophies and teachings seem to get a whole new vocabulary going, saying the same thing, but with a whole new vocabulary you have to learn if you want to understand what they're talking about. And I think that's somewhat counterproductive for teachers to do that I think we ought to all use the same words.
I agree. Yeah, JJ, that I absolutely. That's what I first. What really captured my attention was the simplicity of descriptions. How well you're able to get to the point, and the simplicity of your explanations, even though you're able to explain radically complex things in a very simple language, which is pretty quite masterful there. So it's an absolute pleasure to hear your descriptions and to go along with and to learn your vocabulary that you use as well here. I mean,
Yeah, right.
I wouldn't rather read it any other way, really.
Okay, well, great. Okay, well, really appreciate you being here with us, and good group today, good vibe with you guys, and we will see you next Sunday at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, all being well.
Take care.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
JJ.
Happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
Oh yeah,
Happy
happy
Valentine's
Valentine's Day.
Day.
My wife told me to wish everybody that, and I completely
Yes.
forgot. So thanks for reminding us.
Thank you. Good night.
Yeah, you all have a beautiful week. Thank you very much for having me. We'll see you soon.
Good to have you.